15.
Rofi ignition.
10.
The igniters have been lit.
9, 8, 7, 6.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And liftoff at dawn. The dawn of Orion and a new era of American space exploration.
Good engine control in the first stage. Passing 25 seconds. Velocity 1,341 feet per second. Passing 31 seconds, still looking good. Good engine control. Good chamber pressure in all three boosters in the full power mode. 40 seconds in. Standing by to go to the partial thrust mode in the core. And we have partial thrust command in the core. Core chamber pressure beginning to drop as expected as we're coming up on the 1 minute mark. Mark, 1 minute into the flight. Still looking good. Good chamber pressure in the core booster in the partial thrust mode. Good chamber pressure in port and starboard in full power mode. One minute, 15 seconds into the flight. We have the hydrazine supply valve open in the second stage. 1 minute, 22 seconds in. Max Q, maximum dynamic pressure in the vehicle. Passing 124, Mach 1. Orion and Delta IV now transcending the speed of sound. 1 minute, 31 seconds in. Good engine control in the first stage. Coming up 1 minute, 40 seconds. Velocity now 1,341 feet per second. 1 minute, 50 seconds in. Still looking good. Coming up on 2 minutes. 2 minutes into the flight. Good engine control in the first stage. Port and starboard boosters still at good chamber pressures in the full power mode and good core chamber pressure in the partial thrust mode at 2 minutes, 22 seconds in. Two minutes, 35 seconds in, still looking good. Coming up on the 2 minute, 43 second mark. Mark, 2 minutes, 43 seconds. The Delta IV of heavy Valkyrie now just weighs 1/2 as much as it did at launch, running propellant at the rate of 4,744 pounds per second. Three minutes, 1 second into the flight. Still looking good. Passing Mach 5. Three minutes, 16 seconds in. Good engine control. Less than 1/2 minute remains on 3 booster flight. 3 minutes, 30 seconds in. We're standing by for the command to go to the partial thrust mode in the port and starboard booster. That command should occur about 10 seconds from now. And we've had partial thrust command. Port and starboard should be toggling down to the partial thrust mode. Standing by for main engine cutoff. We have cutoff in the port and starboard and separation. A good separation of the port and starboard boosters. Core booster now powering up to the full power mode. 4 minutes, 10 seconds into the flight. Good chamber pressure in the port. Correction, good chamber pressure in the core booster at 4 minutes, 18 seconds in. Four minutes, 25 seconds in, still looking good. Good engine control in the core. About 1 minute remaining on first stage flight. 4 minutes, 46 seconds in, still looking good. Chamber pressure holding very well in a core booster as we're approaching the 5-minute mark. 5 minutes into the flight. Standing by to go to the partial thrust command. That partial thrust command about 15 seconds from now. Good engine control. Five minutes, 20 seconds in. And we have partial thrust command in the core. Core chamber pressure beginning to go down. As expected, standing by for MECO. We have MECO. The main engine has cut off. Standing by for stage separation. Each have stage separation. Heads is deploying. The nozzle has been extending. Standing by for igniter spark. And we have igniter spark, and we have ignition. Ignition on the second stage. Second stage chamber pressures beginning to rise.
This is Mission Control Houston. We're taking over commentary at this point as we come up on the first two critical Orion program milestones, the service module fairing panel jettison and the launch abort system jettison, standing by for those first two critical events. The service panel jettison has occurred. The three 13 by 14 foot panels have separated. And we have launch abort system jettison. The 361-pound solid propellant motor has pulled the launch abort system free from the upper stage and from Orion. Everything going extremely well. The first two critical milestones have been accomplished, and we are now processing telemetry from the Orion spacecraft through the tracking and data relay satellite system. Coming up on the 7-minute mark into the mission, Orion and the Delta IV upper stage, now 127 miles in altitude, some 700 miles downrange from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. Reports here in Mission Control indicate that Orion's guidance systems are up and running in good shape. This view once again of the service module fairing panel jettison that occurred just about a minute and a half ago. We are now coming up on the 8-minute mark into the flight. Orion and the Delta IV upper stage, 142 statute miles in altitude, almost 900 miles downrange from the Kennedy Space Center. GPS systems on Orion have come into full agreement with navigation systems on the spacecraft. Orion is functioning perfectly at this point. Orion heading almost due east from the Kennedy Space Center in an orbit inclined just about 28.4 degrees to either side of the equator. 8.5 minutes into the flight, the upper stage is currently traveling and carrying Orion to its preliminary orbit, now traveling at a velocity of almost 14,000 miles an hour, its altitude flattening out. The upper stage ignition will continue for about 11 minutes and 30 seconds from the time it began, with SECO 1, or a second stage cutoff number 1, just about 8.5 minutes from now. And this is our first view from cameras on the Orion spacecraft streaming video that is coming down, being processed through the tracking and data relay satellite system, showing a view of the Earth as Orion is being carried to its preliminary orbit. All of its systems operating in excellent condition on this first test flight of America's newest spacecraft. We are also processing telemetry through the Antigua tracking station in the Lesser Antilles, southeast of Puerto Rico. Coming up on the 10-minute mark into the flight, Orion is traveling almost 15,000 miles an hour, nearing its orbital insertion velocity. Ten and a half minutes into the flight, everything going extremely well. This view from one of the cameras in the Orion spacecraft looking at the limb of the Earth as it heads toward its preliminary orbit, sailing over the South Atlantic right now. Currently 155 statute miles above the Earth. The upper stage of the Delta IV rocket, once it cuts off on this first of two such burns for the upper stage in about 6 minutes and 45 seconds, will have left Orion in an orbit for its first lap of the Earth of about 560 by 120 statute miles. So far, all of the guidance and navigation systems on Orion operating perfectly as it rides at the top of the upper stage of the Delta IV rocket that began its maiden journey at 6:05 a.m. Central Time, 7:05 a.m. Eastern Time, just right at the peak of sunrise over the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. Coming up on the 12-minute mark into the flight, Orion now passing 15,000 miles an hour, almost 1,800 miles downrange from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. The next major event, 5.5 minutes from now, that will be SECO 1, or second stage cutoff number 1. That will be the cutoff of the upper stage on the Delta IV rocket, the engine that has propelled Orion at this point uphill towards its preliminary orbit. A second burn of that upper stage will be coming at the 1 hour 55-minute mark into the mission. That will be a 4-minute 40-second burn that will take Orion out of low Earth orbit towards its peak altitude of some 3,630 statute miles above the Earth. About 15 minutes after SECO 1, or the shutdown of the upper stage engine on this first of two burns that the engine will perform, Orion will be commanded into a barbecue roll, basically like a piece of meat on a barbecue spit. It will roll on a very, very slow basis to provide very even thermal conditioning over the spacecraft for the duration of its flight toward deep space. 13.5 minutes into the flight, Orion in the upper stage of the Delta IV now traveling 16,000 miles an hour, more than 2,100 miles downrange from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. Very quiet here in the flight control room. All the flight controllers belonging to the flight operations team under the direction of Flight Director Mike Serafin, enjoying the view from Orion's cameras, this first ever view from America's newest spacecraft as it continues its climb towards its preliminary orbit. This will be two orbits of the Earth, the first elliptical, the second highly elliptical, out to a distance of 3,630 statute miles, passing through the Van Allen radiation belts twice before its high-speed entry back into Earth and a parachute-assisted splashdown some 600 miles to the west of Baja, California, with the total duration for this test flight expected to be 4 hours, 23 minutes in duration. 15 minutes, 20 seconds into the flight since its launch from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. Everything continuing to go extremely well with the first phase of Orion's maiden flight, moving from northwest to southeast across the South Atlantic, soon to approach the west coast of Africa. There are a flotilla of tracking stations around the world that are joining to process telemetry from Orion in concert with the Tracking and Data Relay Satellite System. We have been processing data and telemetry through Antigua. There is a tracking station in South Africa that will also augment the Tracking and Data Relay Satellite System, as well as tracking stations at Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, the tracking station at Kwajalein Island out in the Pacific, the Hawaiian tracking station as well, all contributing to process almost uninterrupted data from Orion for this first test flight. 16 minutes, 20 seconds into the flight. Orion is now some 222 statute miles above the Earth at its apogee, continuing to climb as we approach the 1 minute mark before second stage cutoff.